Hey guys, welcome back to Brian's Mysteries and Adventures on Trail. I hope everybody is having a great holiday weekend. And before we get started with today's video, I just wanted to take a moment of silence and send prayers to all of our fallen heroes and also all the tragic school tragedies that have been going on. My thoughts and prayers to everyone affected by those, and I just can't believe it. So today's video, we're going to be talking about two lost hikers that got lost in the Sierra Mountains in California, Javier Torres and Alex Verzadek. We're going to start talking about Javier first. This is going to be a two-part video because there is a lot of information, and please stick around to the end till I can explain some more of some of the background. Javier was from Chile. He was born there. He was given up for adoption when he was roughly a month old, but thankfully he was adopted by a very loving and caring family. They were poor. They did okay. His father was a rope maker, made various different types of ropes, and his mom was a seamstress, but she also loved gardening. From a very young age, Javier just loved playing in the dirt, the sand. He loved the mountains. So it's not without a sense of irony that when he got older, he became a landscaper, but he had many aspirations, and he was very intelligent from a very young age. He was fascinated with languages. He had started to teach himself English at roughly age 7, also French, and of course he spoke Spanish. And his main goal was to get to the United States of America. He just dreamed of coming to the United States, mainly California. He wanted to come to Los Angeles. And then he wanted to eventually try and hike parts of the Sierra Mountains. He got his wish on January in 1999. He was able to get a temporary green card or permanent visa, excuse me. I'm not sure. It was for roughly 6 months, and he was hoping that when he got here, he would get a job and that they would sponsor him and he would be able to stay. He was just enthralled when his plane landed, and he thought it was so cool that the plane was actually crossing over a road. All this was just total culture shock, even just getting on the plane. It was the first time he had ever been on a plane, and this was all just so exciting for him. He was just blown away even by the sight of Los Angeles when they were flying in. So of course he went down to the baggage claim and was waiting for his baggage, and it was just delayed. Sometimes you're just standing there, and he met this guy who had this really blonde hair, and he had never seen anybody that had blonde hair like that. And this guy's name was Alex Verzadek, and Alex was from Hankala, Finland, which is in it's northwest of Helsinki, sort of in the southern central portion. I'll have a map here so you can see. And these two just bonded instantly. They started talking. Alex asked him if he had a place to stay or where he was staying. And then at the time, Javier hadn't even secured a place. But Alex had some cousins that were living in LA. So he said, well, you can live with us for a little while if you want. They were living in this place called Reseda. Wasn't the greatest apartment, but they had fun. They had this great bond just from the beginning, because when they spoke, they both had these aspirations of going hiking, exploring the city. They instantly became great friends. They were only a couple years age difference. Javier was only 22 and Alex was 24 at the time of their meeting. Alex loved to talk about Finland, the place where he was from, and describe all the beautiful cities and how friendly the people were. Of course, he loved talking about the Northern Lights, and Javier was just mesmerized by this. And of course, he loved the language too. He wanted to learn Alex's language. But eventually, the city of LA, even though they loved exploring, just the infrastructure and the traffic, it sort of started to get to them, because they came to America because they wanted to explore the great outdoors and see these beautiful sequoias and redwoods. They started formulating a plan to go out on this hike, and they were planning to hike around 500 miles together. Unfortunately, neither of them were experienced in hiking at all, and while they were still in LA, they didn't really train much. They looked up some information and they bought some gear, but they bought things like heavy hiking boots, like leather hiking boots, and they bought one tent that they were going to share. Alex was going to carry the tent and ground sheet, and Javier was going to carry the poles and stakes. They were going to be sharing a lot of things, and they just didn't account for a lot of things that could happen. Nevertheless, in March of that year, they went out to the PCT, roughly a little bit north of Warner Springs in that area, and they started their hike. And at first blush, the hike was going great. I mean, they had a lot of fun. Things were going well. They had beautiful sunsets. They would chat. They had wonderful conversations about their childhood, things that they wanted to do while they were in the United States after they got back from their hike. And it was just a wonderful time. But unfortunately, around day number 4 is where they ran into problems. The first minor thing that happened was the zipper on Javier's backpack broke. Okay, fine. They kept hiking, but then they got into an area where there was still light snow. They were starting to come up the mountain that goes up to Idlewild, so they decided to stop for lunch. And of course, they were carrying just this ridiculous kinds of foods like full sausages and hot dogs. They made a fire. Javier had brought some of this awesome coffee from home that apparently he could only get in Chile, and they were fine. Everything was going fine until Alex said that he had to go to the bathroom. And for whatever reason, when Alex left to go to the bathroom, he took his full pack with him. Well, Javier didn't think anything of this. Then he was getting a little concerned because it was 10, 15 minutes, then 20 minutes, then 30 minutes, then 40 minutes. And at first Javier was like, well, maybe he really had to go to the bathroom. And he went to try and find some more water because they were running low. And then he really started to panic because when he got back to the campsite where they're having lunch, he still wasn't there. So he got to this point where he could get to where the highest point was, and he was trying to look to see if he could see Alex, but he couldn't see him anywhere. Naturally, Javier was starting to panic, and of course he spent the rest of the day looking for Alex, calling his name, for hours and hours until the sun was getting ready to go down. He went back to the point where he could see higher up. He looked all over, but this area is very dense and thick with foliage and manzanitas and all kinds of trees, and he couldn't see him. He just couldn't find him. By nightfall, Javier was absolutely terrified. Not only was this going to be his first night sleeping out in the wilderness without a tent, but he was also very concerned about his friend Alex. He didn't understand what could have happened to him and what he would have been able to do because Javier had all the tent stakes and poles. It was just a very scary, scary night, and when he woke up the next morning, he still was unsure what he should do. He didn't know whether he should wait there or try and go out and look for him. So he did. He went out and looked for him for about 4 or 5 hours, and he still couldn't find him. And then he was scared that he was going to get lost himself. So we went back to the place where they were having the lunch. He waited there for another 5 hours, and he realized that Alex wasn't coming back, or something must have happened. So he left some food and water, and then he had a plan to try and go and get help. Unfortunately, all he had was a compass. He didn't have the big map. Alex had that in his pack. Like I said at the beginning, both men were seriously underprepared. I mean, they were wearing jeans. Their clothing was not necessarily appropriate for the type of hike that they were going to be doing. So Javier spent this next full day just sort of going in a circle, and he was smart. He was more adapted to the mountains, or he was more suited to the mountains than Alex was, because he had spent much more time in the outdoors, and Javier was extremely intelligent. So he would mark the trees with his little knife that he had so that he could find his way back. But by nightfall, he was just once again terrified because he had to sleep out. And of course, it started raining and it was very cold. He did have his sleeping bag, but of course it was down. So once it got wet, that was useless. It was just a very, very hard night for Javier. Of course, he was constantly thinking of Alex, and although his original plan was to go get help, he was both scared and unsure about leaving the area, but that next day he knew he had to, but he didn't really know what direction he was going. He sort of did, but unfortunately at some point he lost the main trail, and even today the trails going up into Idlewild can be very confusing and difficult. When he could, he would make a fire at night. He thought maybe if Alex had picked up the trail and was following him, he would see it. But this just went on for days, and he basically ended up getting lost himself, and he was just sort of wandering around hoping that he would find someone. And back then, the trail wasn't half as traveled and as popular as it is today. A side note is when Miss Witherspoon made her movie, that's when it really gained popularity. Now it's just always just really, really full. In any event, Javier was desperate. He was looking around, and he also had left the water jug for Alex because he was worried about Alex. So he had no way of collecting water except scooping it up. He was also getting desperate because he was having trouble finding water sources. But one day in the morning, he came upon this really dense area, and he noticed that there was a hose system lying on the ground. And to him, he was like, oh, I can just cut a piece of this hose and at least use it as a straw, even though I won't be filtering the water because I don't have a filter. He was also so happy to find what looked like a very clean stream. Well, just as he was about to cut that hose, he heard a yell, "Lâche la couteau! Pas bouger!" And he froze because he knew it was French, he knew what the guy was saying, and he had no idea what was going on. Little did he know he had stumbled upon an illegal growing operation, which was much more common back in the day before legalization in California. So they dragged him back to camp, and he tried to explain to them, no, I'm just a lost hiker and trying to find my friend. Well, that senior grower that was running the camp, he didn't want any piece of that kind of action. He was convinced that Javier was some kind of spy from another growing facility or a federal agent that was trying to penetrate their camp. Javier was very candid with them, and he had said he was only in the United States for a few months, so they couldn't believe that somebody that was in the United States for only a few months was basically fluent in 3 languages and had somehow just gotten lost in the woods. They had him tied to this chair, and they just left him there all night, but he waited until they were asleep, and he was able to jimmy his arms out of this chair, and he quietly left. But before he did, he grabbed one of their water bottles and a little bit of food, and he was able to get away without waking. Well, when those guys woke up the next morning, they were so pissed. They were so insane with rage. They sent out a search party for Javier, but Javier had hiked through the night, and he had purposely gone in a very dangerous sort of direction uphill, and he was just hoping they wouldn't find him. Fortunately, they didn't find him. However, now Javier was even in more trouble because they had taken his pack and they had put it somewhere, and he couldn't afford to stick around and try and look for it. However, one good thing was he had been wearing this long shirt that covered the fanny pack that he had with him. The growers never saw it, so they never took it from him. So he still had it with him. In that fanny pack, he had water purifying tablets, his pocket knife, a little flashlight, a few other odds and ends. But the big thing was that he now had a water jug and he could purify water. He just kept hiking, looking, trying to find his way out, trying to find help. He started to lose hope, and he was definitely very weak. He'd only eaten a little bit of food. He was still struggling with water sources until this one evening he came upon this beautiful falls with some water, so he got water there. In fact, he was so disoriented, he thought he was in Yosemite because that was pictures he had seen of Yosemite with all those beautiful waterfalls, but he knew he couldn't be that far north. So he kept on going. Javier was a tough guy, and his parents taught him to never ever give up, and he came upon this one pass, and he was just praying that if he could get past that, he would find a town or some other hikers, anything, any type of help. At this point, it had been almost 2.5 weeks since he had been out, and all these things had happened to him, and he was just really coming to his wits' end. He was just losing his strength. He was losing his mental capacity to really make positive decisions and just function. By the grace of God, he ran into these 3 hikers that were out photographing the night sky, and at first he was scared to talk to them after his last encounter, but then he saw it was 2 females with a male, and he remembered there was no females at that camp. So he finally did go up to them, and they could tell he was in rough shape, and they led him to safety. Of course, they had all kinds of questions for him. They wanted to know what happened. And all he said that he was out on a hike and he got lost. He didn't mention his friend Alex, although he was very worried about Alex. All he wanted to do was get home and talk to his cousins, Alex's cousins, because he didn't know about search and rescue. He didn't even know if he could find his way back to the spot where they got separated. So in his mind, he thought that, well, what can we do here? All he was thinking about, he wanted to get home, ironically back to LA, get his cousins and get them to help, because his cousins, Alex's cousins, had been living in the United States for years, so he knew that they would have more information and understand how to handle a situation like this. Javier had lost over 20 pounds by the time he got home. He was malnourished. He was in really rough shape. The cousins obviously knew that this was a huge, just an awful experience, and obviously they helped him. But of course, Javier refused to go to the hospital, but he did make a full recovery, and he ended up getting a job as a carpenter and learning that trade and staying in the United States. They sponsored him. His life turned out to be great. He had a wonderful life. He ended up moving out of LA into the Eastern Sierra of California. Took several classes on hiking and became much more advanced and smart about it, and he went on many grand adventures. And don't worry, of course, he told his cousins, Alex's cousins, about what happened, and we will be discussing Alex and what happened with Alex in the next video, which will be coming here in the next few days. I will be posting that video before next weekend. Next weekend is when I am scheduled to leave for my trip. And just for some more background information, I left this to the end because I know a lot of people are interested in this kind of thing. But I first heard this story in 2019, and about 4 hikers were talking, and one guy was telling the story. And at first I didn't really know about the validity of the story because there's really no information. There's no newspaper articles or anything like that. But then last year, a female hiker that was in a group, a trail family, told me the same story, and she had the same names and basically the same details. So I wanted to pass it along to you. Please stay tuned for the next video where I will be discussing what happened to Alex Versdek and other details about this story. I want to thank everybody for watching. As always, special thank you to co.ag for providing the background music, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with me to the end. I hope everyone's doing well, and I hope everyone's having a great holiday weekend. And I just wanted to say I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of you, and if any of you guys have any suggestions, for anybody that's new to the channel, I just want to let you know I make all these videos from my phone, and I'm hoping to upgrade in the future, but right now I'm still working a full-time job. I know a lot of people don't care about that kind of stuff, that's why I leave it to the end. But I hope everyone's doing well, and thank you all for your support. I know I haven't been replying to as many comments or leaving as many hearts since my accident, and that's just because I've just been so overwhelmed with trying to get things ready, and I do apologize about that, but I will be getting back to it. I am feeling a lot better. I saw one of my doctors, got all bona fides, just have to see another, and I should be good to go. But I'm still healing. You know, I fractured my orbital bone, which is one of the hardest bones in the body, so that takes a while to heal, but other than that, I'm doing a lot better, and I thank you all for your patience on the upload schedule. I really appreciate it. All your kindness, all your kind comments. I just couldn't do this without you guys, so I just wanted to say thank you so much.